Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another great episode of the Five Star Revolution Podcast with your host, CJ Price. If you haven't already, go over to Facebook right now and join us. Five Star Revolution Podcast on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Five Star Revolution Podcast. Tonight, we have a very special guest. He's a veteran inside of the pro wrestling business. His name is the president of wrestling, Bill Stamper. How you doing today, sir?
I am doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for joining us here tonight. I know you're a busy guy, so thank you so much for joining us here.
I appreciate it. Yeah, you're right. I am busy. Being the president, there's lots of things I have to take care of.
So I asked this question to every single guy and girl who comes on my podcast. Were you a fan of wrestling growing up? And if so, who are your favorites?
I was. I had this weird. I don't even know entrance into my life of pro wrestling, like being a fan. That I had ESPN Classic as a kid, so I was watching like world class championship wrestling from the '80s, much later than the '80s. So like that was some of my first introductions because I would come home from high school, or actually from middle school, excuse me, and that was on TV. And so I was watching like Eric Embry versus Skandar Akbar. And unless I talk to somebody who's from Texas, typically they look at me like, what? Who? Because they're not familiar with that because that happened in the 80s. And so like I was really introduced to this really big storytelling wrestling. And Eric Embry was one of my favorites growing up as a kid. I really quickly identified with him as sort of a hero. Of course, I went through my Hogan phase. I went through my Brutus the Barber Beefcake phase, I guess you could say. The Rock and Stone Cold. You know, you go through those phases of who you like, and then up to that point when I knew I wanted to get into wrestling, and it became very different about like who am I a fan of now because I'm in this industry, and so there's people I really enjoy and like, but I don't know if I'm a fan anymore. It's hard to describe in that way.
So, when you were growing up, and you're from Maryland, correct?
Mm-hmm.
How'd you find out about wrestling school? Like, what were your first steps?
So when I was a kid, I actually wrote to WCW and WWE and asked the question, like, why can't kids wrestle? I think it'd be really cool. And I got a letter back from WCW. And in the letter, it was like, yeah, there are wrestling schools. They typically don't take you till you're 18. And oh, yeah, buy our book about pro wrestling. I did not buy the book. But then I got a second letter that also said the same thing, like, hey, there's training schools. You have to be 18. So when I was like 11 or 12, I found out that there was this thing about pro wrestling training schools. And then when I turned 14, a high school friend knew somebody who had just graduated the year prior, and he was at a wrestling school. And so I really early on knew that there were wrestling schools out there. And this is in the burgeoning days of the internet, when you're still dialing up on a modem. So like being, researching what's out there and who's where and what companies are where was still a new thing, and there wasn't the social media access like there is now to find out about a lot of it. So you're just digging through what you can find. But I found out really early about these schools, and looked at wrestling magazines at the time of like Pro Wrestling Illustrated and The Wrestler and whatever else I could grab my hands on. Like, what are these promotions and where are these places and who are these people, to find out about where to go and the highlights and places to be on the eye, places to keep your eye on for future potential bookings.
Who was your trainer initially?
Initially, I went to a guy named Otto Stark. He ran a school called the Dominion in Maryland. It was not good, but I didn't know that at the time. And again, just because I'm weird, when I graduated high school, I knew a couple of things. Um, if I wanted to go wherever I was going to go next, whether it was wrestling training or college, I had to pay for it myself. And I knew I couldn't afford doing both at the same time. And some of that might be just logistics, because where I was at the moment, there wasn't like an immediate school immediately nearby. So I was like, all right, I will pay for college, but I'll start working in the back for different promotions, because I wanted to make sure that if I got into the business, that I wanted to be in the business. So I started working backstage for a company called IPWA, which was ran by Cue Ball Carmichael. I started working backstage for another company called Different Wrestling Federation that ran out of State College in Pennsylvania. And I started just learning the business. Like, what was it like to be there? And then some of the guys would start showing me stuff. But after that point, then I actually found my like formal trainer, but with Otto. And then when I left Otto, I remember I had my first match and I was like, wow, I suck. Like, I recognized it right away. I was very gracious that it worked a friend of mine. And in that match, I was like, I just feel it. Like, I need something else and something's wrong. And he gave me some great tips. And then from there, I just began doing whatever seminars I could. There's some people like Brian Wenzel who did OVW and WXW, who I know not a lot of people know about, but at the time that he was at OVW, he was one of only 2 non-WWE developmental guys on OVW television. He was that good. And then had seminars with Mike Quackenbush and seminars with Trent Acid and Johnny Kashmere and seminars with Chris Hero. So it was like I just tried to soak up all the different knowledge I could from all these different people, as well as gaining my own experience and working with other people in different areas, because geographically speaking, wrestling can be a little bit different in areas. There's not so much the territories anymore, but I would say, and even now it's broken down even more. But especially when I was young in wrestling, I found that though there were not territories, there was like these circles. Like, I knew a lot of people in Maryland who did like Baltimore, Philly, New Jersey. And then I knew people who did like West Virginia, Pittsburgh, Ohio. And when I started at community college and I went to a 4-year school. And when I was at my 4-year school, those circles didn't cross. So like I'm in the middle. And I remember I left when I graduated college, got a job, went back to school for my master's. And I'm like, guys from Maryland, come up this way and pick me up on your way to these other events. And they weren't coming that way. And same thing with the folks from West Virginia, Pittsburgh, Ohio. They weren't going the other way. So it's like, I'm stuck in the middle. And so that has changed dramatically. But for me, it was always about like, what can I learn next from the next person down the road?
Very good answer. So what would you say to that Phil Stamper who first started wrestling to the guy that he is today?
I do think at the time when I was working backstage with Cue Ball, I could have trained with Cue Ball. I didn't think I had the money at the time, and so if I had managed my money differently, I might have had that opportunity earlier. I would have avoided some of the other pitfalls, because I tried to go train at other places, and people no-showed or were wishy-washy, and didn't know that until later on. And so I think I might have started my experience somewhere else. So I would try to guide my own path a little bit differently. I would probably listen to my instinct a little bit more. I found that over time, and this is just life, forget wrestling, like it includes wrestling, but I wasn't good about listening to my own instinct for a long, long time. And even now, like there's times where it's like, oh, I don't know what I should do. And my gut is screaming, why aren't you doing this thing? You should be doing this thing. And I'm like, I don't know. Should I? And then it's like, wait a minute. You are often right. Like if your gut is really that strong about telling you something, like you should really listen to it. There's a reason. Go do the thing. And so I've had to learn, okay, I'm listening to you. Go do the thing.
So it sounds like you're your own worst critic. Am I right?
Oh gosh, yeah. And you'll find the most wrestlers are. Because they know what to pick apart in themselves. They know what they want things to look like. And when they're like, I watch it and go, that is not what I expected it to be. Like, they're going to be the first ones to know it.
So can you explain to the listeners who don't know who you are, who the president of wrestling, Phil Stamper, is?
So I have been involved in wrestling for a long time. I have literally worked in every position there possibly could be in wrestling, other than running my own event myself. And so I have been in the ring as a wrestler, as a referee, as a manager, as I've done commentating and ring announcing. I do backstage production, video editing, commentary. I do voiceover work. I do. I mean, I was at Wrestling Revolver this past weekend, and I'm running our video screen. which I don't. I don't know what to do. Like you sort of, I've sort of learned all these things as I've gone through. Um, at the same time, like never lost that spot of I love being in front of a camera. So I'm that person that now other people turn to as the authority. That I'm a person that others have come to look to for an answer, the right direction, the right decision, and sometimes, more often than not, I will help them, and sometimes that may also then benefit me.
So where did you get come up with that shtick, the president of wrestling?
So it legit turned into it. I was at that point in my life where I was like, you know what, I need something different, and just was looking at myself and like, well, who am I in wrestling right now? Though I'm an active wrestler, I was finding myself in that role of like more people are turning to me to give them the answer. More people are turning to me to say, hey, Philip, we want your help with these things. That I was becoming sort of that figure, and I was like, well, what about the president of wrestling? Who else runs this better than me? And who knows all the people like I do. And it always shocks me. There was a promoter. I don't even want to say his name because I don't want the curse of that person to come back to me. But there was a promoter that I worked with for 7 years, and we'd be talking about something, and it was like, oh yeah, this person, blah 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 blah. He would stop and go, Philip, how do you know this person? And I'm like, because I'm in wrestling and I've been around a long time, and I have worked with this person before. And it's sort of surprising when people don't realize that there are all these connections that people have in the world of wrestling, and that many times you don't know how people are connected. And so, I mean, I was at Wrestling Revolver in Iowa this past weekend, and there were wrestlers from literally all over the country there. Actually, from all over the world who were there, and it's like I can call almost all of them up and be like, hey, it's Philip, this is what's going on, and we would know each other and be able to just vibe like that right away because we have these interesting associations that we have with each other.
So you mentioned that you've done it all, pretty much done it all in the world of professional wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
What do you enjoy doing most, and what do you think are you best at?
Ooh, I love being in front of a camera. I can't hide it. So I definitely like that role that's in front of a camera. Certainly, I would say being a mouthpiece, being able to talk, has been a virtue. At first, I didn't know how to take it as I was becoming like an authority figure, as I was being the general manager of places, and I sort of hit this certain kind of vibe and rhythm with it. Um, because I was finding my own way as being that leader that people would turn to, and it felt very natural. It was the very right fit. Physically, at the time when I first did it, I had been going off and on with having severe nerve pain in my left arm. And I'd been in and out of physical therapy for it. Eventually, it resulted in me having to get neck surgery. Basically, the same exact surgery that Edge had. It was fusion of my C5, C6, C7, and also spinal stenosis. So the discs were projecting out from my spinal column or into my spinal column between the C5, C6, and C7. So they had to take the two discs out. Basically, my C5, C6, C7, three vertebrae are now one giant bone stack. But the spinal stenosis has mostly removed. It's funny because on MRIs you see little bumps now in my spinal cord, which aren't supposed to be there. But uh, I'm more out of pain than I was at that time. Because at that time I was like, well, what if this pain doesn't go away? I don't feel comfortable in a ring. For my own safety, let alone somebody else's safety, if I can't trust my left arm to pick up weight. And then coming out of surgery, I had because I had gone through that for such a long time, I have some minor permanent nerve damage. So it took a long time for like my left arm to finally like come back to be a normal person's strength arm. And so even now, as I try to push it, like, okay, I want to, just for my own personal health, just to try to get it better and back to a better place. It's like, wow, I didn't think I'd be this long from my surgery, and I'm still working at trying to get full function of my arm back.
So was that injury due to wrestling?
Um, Wrestling didn't help, but there was no like one sudden impact injury. It was sort of a long-term wear and tear. And I'd done amateur wrestling, and I'd done judo and jujitsu, pro wrestling. So sort of all of that combined together, they were like, yeah, you just over time, the wear and tear you had on your neck, just it was enough.
So what do you say to those people that think wrestling is fake?
Watch it and tell me what's fake. Uh, to, I mean, I never like to be like, oh, look at this scar and tell me it's fake. Like that maybe actually I think I did pull that out once, like when the scar was fresh. Now that I think about it, but I didn't want to be that guy because I don't like, I don't hold any fault for this. I also tore my knee apart in a wrestling match one time. So, but I don't have like any ill will towards the fact that that happened. It's sort of like it's a hazard of being in the business, and it's sort of a thing that happens, and you move on from it because you have to. And if you stay back where you were, like, oh, I got hurt, I can't believe I got hurt, like you'll never get past it, you'll never improve. And I probably did better after like my knee tore apart than I was doing before. So you just you kind of gotta have to keep moving.
You can't fake gravity, my friend. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, that's very true. But for the people who call it fake, it's like enjoy it for what it is. And if you don't enjoy it, all right, thank you for your time. Like it's wrestling.
So this is the portion of the podcast where I asked the wrestler to cut a promo for me in character, if you don't mind, for like 30
Ooh.
seconds. Heel or face doesn't matter.
Well, it depends a little bit on what you want me to talk about because, for myself as being the president of wrestling, think of all the connections that I could make for you, CJ. Think of everybody that I know who you could come to know. Think of the opportunities that you could have if you aligned with me. Think of your future and think of what could happen next and how you will benefit and how I will benefit. And I will make sure that all the right things happen for you. And on that, you can trust in Phil. It took me a second. I had to like have that moment just to like, where am I going with this?
I like that, man. That was right off the cuff, man. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Most people stumble a little bit, but you did really good. So why does wrestling mean so much to you?
Ooh, I think I think even as a kid in wrestling, I knew wrestling was going to be a part of my life forever. At some level, in the competitiveness and being involved in events or whatever it may be, from amateur wrestling, from judo, jujitsu, and pro wrestling. Like wrestling is just it's been a part of my life. It's going to be a part of my life.
Very good answer, man. So what can we expect out of you in the next 3 years? What is on your agenda? Because I know you've been a part of this for 20 plus years now.
Mhm.
So do you have
Well,
more in the tank?
I definitely do. And now that the arm is coming back, the nerve pain is gone. Hey, you might see me be just that much more physical here and there, again and again, and more often. I'm still the general manager of multiple promotions. So, hey, there are a lot of decision making that I can make for a lot of people. Uh, I've also had the opportunity where I've been on events I've been an extra for the WWE. I've been an extra for Impact. I've been on those programs before. So I've never been on AAW. So hey, there's that in my brain. Uh, I want to continue just moving forward. I want to do better. I want to do more. I associate with a lot of top tier talent. Um, this last weekend in Iowa formed a new faction called the Unit with JT Dunn, Infrared, who are Logan James and Tyler Matrix, as well as Larry D from Impact Wrestling. And that faction is going to lead a lot of movement and momentum, especially in the Midwest area. And JT also has a Northeast faction of the Unit. I want to continue traveling. And in the last year, as everybody was been dealing with the pandemic, in the last year, I had my first live event in Texas. I had my first live event in Florida. That was part of a promotion that was out of Texas and Florida because with Revolver, we've gone to those states already. But being a part of another company that's already a regular part of that, went to Oklahoma for the first time. So I was doing things for the first in my wrestling career, while a lot of other people, and rightfully so, like I'm not just unjustifying why somebody wouldn't go out adventure and risk their own safety or sanity because hey, maybe I'm just not the most sane person in the world either. But I don't stop. Like people have said to me, like Phil, um, you make work fun, but you make fun work. and that's very true. And there was somebody who I hate to this day, who I shake my fist at in my brain, who one time said to me, like, because I didn't understand. I was at a promotion, and the promoter, I would say, was a little vacant, like just not putting his best foot forward. And people kept coming to me asking me questions about the event, and I'm like, why is everybody coming to me? I'm not the promoter. I'm not the booker. I'm not associated with anything that's happened, like with the operation of the event. And they're like, well, Phil, you have a brain. You know what's going to come out best for us. You know what's going to come out best for this event to be successful. We're going to come to you because you are always going to make sure that we have a good time, that we have fun. You might not have fun, Phil, which I hated. The second he said that, I was like, I don't want to not have fun. Like, this is my life. Like, I don't want, because for me, wrestling is not my fun thing. Wrestling is not a hobby. Wrestling is my life. Wrestling is a job that I have. Wrestling pays bills for me. So I definitely keep that very active in my mind, that it isn't the side thing, it is the thing.
So wrestling's pretty much your life 24/7.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's a great way to think about it, man. Because once you're in a trade or in a sport such as wrestling, you're either full time or you're nothing at all. That's how you make it to the top. And speaking of the top, you said that you've been an extra for WWE. You've
Mm-hmm.
been an extra for Impact Wrestling. What? Who would you say you like working for the most, and what did you learn from them?
Ooh, that's a dangerous question. For all the reasons that it's dangerous. And I would say of the couple of times I've been associated with Impact, it's always been with different sets of people. So I'm hesitant. So it's sort of like there were sort of three eras of Impact that I kind of was involved with, and one era with the WWE that I was involved with. I like them both. And it's funny because this is just how my brain works. The last time I went to a live WWE event, I was as interested in what was happening behind the scenes, like watching the physical production and how it was running, as much as the live product I was watching in the ring. And I didn't go in with that intention. I didn't go like, oh, let me look over here and just like not really literally peek behind the curtain, but just literally watch the stage and see what they were doing. But I found that I was doing that. And it was like, oh, okay, well, let me just kind of casually watch and just see how things would move and operate. So it's more about what I take away from each of those individual. I'll be very honest. I've had a lot of fun with different independent events, more than I had on some of those events, and it was just more because I was maybe a little bit more involved, maybe more hands-on, and got to see a little bit more of how everything was running and how somebody else does something a little bit different. And something that people don't realize with a product like the WWE. The WWE is a television show first. It is not a wrestling program on television. Its focus is to be a television program. And I'm not, when I say that, I'm not knocking it, because it's the number one leader in pro wrestling. It's what all of us in pro wrestling look at and ascribe to be, right? And so, or aspire to be. I'm merging words in my brain. We all aspire to be at that place because it is literally the pinnacle. But it's a production. It's a production house. It is a force in entertainment. And so I learned a lot from how they run as an element of television, um, where Impact had a very different style on it, and again, it's not a knock on Impact; it's just a very different kind of style, and that they focused on the athleticism a lot more than
Mhm.
the television production side of it. Of course, they're a television product too, so yes, they're taking care of that, but they would rather put over like a better athletic performance.
Mhm.
I'm trying to be careful because I also think the WWE
I totally
has
understand what you mean, man, and
right,
I totally agree.
right,
WWE is a production monster.
yeah,
They want to make their show look the best possible, while places like Impact and AEW want to make wrestling look like wrestling. You know what I'm
you're
saying?
right, and it yes, exactly that. And all three have top tier talent, like that literally could float between those three companies
Right.
and be the best at any of those three companies. So that is the top tier talent of the world. Um, and so just working with some of those people, you gain so much from that experience.
So, a couple more questions for me, Mr. Stamper, before I let you go. You've been in this business for 20 years. You've been across the United States, and I'm imagining outside of the United States.
Hmm.
So, I'm assuming you have at least one funny bro story that you can tell us.
So I don't know why this came up in my brain this past weekend. So I used to go up to Canada pretty regularly for a company called MWF. Ran by a guy named Fred de Lemerveille. It was in Valleyfield, Quebec, and we're on our. I had gone up with Lucky 13. A lot of people know from the New Jersey area, from CCW, from H2O, and we were heading on our way back, and another wrestler was like, "Hey, Phil." Uh, my brain wants to do the Quebecois accent, so if it slips into that, I apologize. He's like, "Hey, Phil, you need to follow me. I will show you a quicker way." And so Lucky and I are hop in the car. We're following him, and on roads that are probably like 40 miles per hour, he's going 100. And so on back roads in the winter in Quebec, and I remember at one point, Lucky's in the car and goes, "Hey, Phil, look, a reindeer." And now to explain in that area, like you think of a deer in the United States like a deer, like reindeer are like elk, like they are gigantic monsters of an animal. And so he goes, "Hey, look, a reindeer," and it was the gigantic beast of a monster of a reindeer. And I'm like, "Oh crap, we're going 100 on a road made for 40, and we're going to die." That's all I can think of is like the reindeer's gonna take us out. And yeah, just trying to keep up to get back to the United States border at that point. It's like, okay, just keep moving.
That's funny, bro. I imagine you have a lot of more funny stories, but we can get another podcast down the road so we can talk about that. So my last question is, with so much years in the business and everything you've done in your career, what's one thing that you haven't done that you wish you can do?
I mean, of course, I want a long-term contract with the televised company. Like that's the
Well,
thing,
besides
right?
the obvious.
Right. Um, ooh, ooh. I mean, there are some people out there that I've not yet been in the ring with, one on one from the wrestling side. Um, I mean, I've known Sammy Callahan for a long time, uh, and never had the chance to be in a match with him. Though we have been on opposite sides of the ring, it's been me as a mouthpiece and him in the ring performing. And so having an opportunity to go one on one with him, and there's a number of people that are on that list too. And what's interesting as more time goes on, and I become aware of different talent that are out there, and more new talent keeps coming. Like wrestling doesn't stop. Like more talent is going to come up. A year from now, we're going to be talking about talent that you've never heard of before today, and you're going to be in a year from now like, wow, this person is amazing, and why weren't we talking about this person a year ago? And I keep finding like those individuals keep knocking up on my list too, because they're making waves and they're making attention for themselves. And as seeing young talent succeed, I like seeing. I and maybe this might sound like a knock, and maybe it is. I always like watching wrestlers who have that level of potential that they're trying to aspire to, and that they're climbing up, trying to reach that potential. So that means they're pushing harder and they're doing more work than the person who's like, I've been there, I've done that, I'm at my peak. Like, I don't need to try hard. There was a wrestler I used to know that whenever he would show up at an event and be like, yeah, I have so and so tonight. It's going to be an easy night. I hated it. I was like, I already know your match is going to probably be one of the worst of the night. And he was one of the best on the card. But I was like, because he said that, I was like, I know he's not going to put his best effort forward. He's going to just do a passable, not a barely passable effort. And so why would I enjoy watching that? So I like a lot of the people who are out there who are like, you're good now, but in a year you're going to be even better. In another year you're going to be amazing. Like a guy like Trey Miguel, I think of like when I first met him, I was like, wow, Trey's really good. And then like 6 months later, I'm like, wow, he's gotten better. 6 months later, oh my gosh, he's gotten even better. To this day, like every time I see him, I'm like, man, Trey just keeps getting better and better and better. Um, and so like I like seeing that kind of growth and potential out of people. Sage Phillips out of Indiana is another guy. I think of him as like my little brother, but I've never been in the ring with him before. Um, Speedball Mike Bailey, who the very first time I met him, he made me feel really good and really bad all at the same time, because he was like, I met him at a CZW event. We were backstage, and it was his first time at CZW, and he walks in the back door and he beelines for me. Now, at this point, I had never met him, and he's like, "Hey Phil, I saw you and I needed to come up and say hi to you." I was like, "Oh, hi." Hi, Mike, how are you? And like, I'd never met him. In my brain, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I met him, and like, I've somehow just totally spaced. And he's like, I saw you at an event actually that MWF event in Valleyfield. He's like, I saw you at an MWF event in Quebec years ago, and I remembered you, and I just had to come up and say hi. And I was like, were you on the event? He was like, no, I was only 12 years old, and I died a little bit inside. But like, and now he's just got signed by Impact. So like,
Yep.
Mike, someone else who I've never not been in the ring with. So like, there's all this amazing talent that's out there that keeps coming and coming and coming. And so there's more people I want to work with and be associated with, because that's just going to keep coming in wrestling. I would love the day that comes that, I mean, I also, not only am I doing wrestling full time, and not just like on weekends, like I do stuff during the week, like to help promote wrestling, to help do media and marketing for wrestling, to do some video editing. But at the same time, like I have an office job separate from my wrestling life. And it's like, wow, that'd be really great to move away from my office life and focus 100% on wrestling. Maybe that's the goal.
So my last question for you is to piggyback off your office job. How do you balance that? Because I know you wrestle and you're involved in wrestling
Mhm.
a lot. How do you balance your work life from your wrestling life?
Um, some people might say I don't. I mean, like I had taken off from my office job to go to Iowa this past weekend, but I was getting calls and responding to emails while I was in Iowa for my office job. And I have an hour and a half commute one way to my office. So that's when I'm doing a lot of my wrestling phone calls. So I've just had to learn how to balance it. And it is like you never stop. You just have to keep moving and keep moving and keep moving. And you just kind of get used to it. Um, it also does mean that, you know, as people will talk about their regular jobs and they're working so many days in a row, I'm constantly working between two jobs. And so it is just like I just keep pushing and pushing and pushing.
Sounds good, my friend. And where can our listeners, where can our followers follow you on social media?
So you can find me wherever there's social media. Look up Trust in Phil. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok. Look up Trust in Phil, and you will find me.
The president of wrestling, Phil Stamper. Thank you so much, Mr. Phil Stamper, for joining us here on the 5 Star Revolution podcast. And for you listeners, don't forget, go over to Facebook and join us, 5 Star Revolution podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, 5 Star Revolution podcast. Mr. Stamper, we wish you the best of luck in your career, and thank you so much for joining us here tonight. It was a true pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Take care, man.